What if you could take the art of something like Reiki and add it to your storytelling skills? And should you take other things in your life, other disciplines and practices that you participate in, and blend them into your storytelling approach? Well, short answer, my friends, is yes. But luckily for you, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in today's episode. Welcome to the Storytelling Lab, where we break down the art and science of storytelling. My name is Bennett. I am your host, and I'm a filmmaker and an author on a quest to understand how we can tell better stories so that we can do better work and make the world a better place. Each episode, I host one of the world's best storytellers to help you understand how to leverage storytelling to increase your sales, deepen your connections, and serve your audiences better. What's up, storytellers? Welcome back to the Storytelling Lab podcast. Today, my guest is Wil Weldon, and Wil lives right here in my town of Durham, North Carolina. We actually know each other. We're friends. We've worked together before. We've hung out together before. But something special about what Wil does. Now, we both have similar backgrounds. We're both storytellers and do documentaries, and he is a video journalist. But the thing that separates him, which is so interesting to me because I'm not familiar with this world, is he is also a Reiki practitioner. And Reiki, if you don't know, is not exactly like massage, but similar. And it's based off of the concept that the practitioner can help heal you by transferring energy through their hands. Now, what Wil tells me is it's not just through touch. You can also transfer energy by getting really, really close to touching someone and even talking to someone and being around someone. So this is exactly how he landed on the idea for his new book, which is called INNERviewing, not interviewing, but inner viewing, like your inner self. He calls it heart-forward storytelling and holistic communication. We talk about how to follow the story, follow the interview when you're talking to somebody or communicating with someone. You don't have to be a video journalist for this episode to help you understand. I talk about it all the time. Storytelling is not just a marketing tool. It's not just a filmmaking or writing tool. It's a communication tool. So do you communicate with people on a regular basis? I sure hope so, in many, many different ways. So understanding how you can tap into their hearts and transfer energy and pull the energy from them without feeling like you're forcing it out of them is a skill. Absolutely a skill that you should cultivate and harness. This is what we talk about. How to interview someone in a way that you go deeper to the inner levels of their psyche, of their being, of their person, understanding them and helping them reveal parts of themselves that they might not necessarily be comfortable doing with a less skilled interviewer. This is such a life skill to have, and I thought it was such a unique intersection. We talk about this all the time on the show, how to find your story for the work that you do. And if Wil is both a Reiki practitioner and a video journalist, imagine him marrying those two worlds. It's exactly what he did with this book, and it's exactly what he does with his coaching clients. This was such an interesting take on his approach to storytelling. It's exactly what I want you to learn more of because we all have unique approaches, but most of the time we need help finding them. So here is my conversation with Wil Weldon, and I hope that you love it. Wil, welcome to the Storytelling Lab.
Thanks, Rain. I'm excited to be here. This is an honor. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited you're here too, man. A fellow filmmaker in North Carolina. I'm excited to get into all these topics. But first, I gotta say, I know, just for everyone listening, I know a little bit about your background. We've known each other for a while. We've collaborated a little bit before in the past, but you've got some stuff coming up that I don't know about, so I'm interested in diving in. And we talked about this a little bit before. But I know that most of your background's in documentaries, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I like to say video journalism because that encompasses a lot more than sort of just documentary.
Fair enough. Why is that the field that you're most passionate about?
Well, it's something that just comes naturally to me. And I think it's, journalism is really storytelling, right? And so I thought I wanted to go to film school after college, but I didn't really want to go to LA or New York. And I didn't know, film school's actually harder than med school to get into, as you probably know. And a lot of people question the value of film school. So I just sort of, I didn't pursue it for a few years, and then eventually came back to it because that was just kind of what I do. What I want to do is tell stories through visual media.
Hmm.
And then I went to journalism school at UNC, and so kind of branded myself as a journalist as opposed to just a filmmaker.
What is it about the true stories of real people that's compelling to you?
Well, that's a good question. I think, I think part of it comes down to, the cliche that truth is stranger than fiction.
Absolutely.
Um, and really, there's no shortage of stories you can find. I mean, if you read the obituaries in the New York Times, you can, and sometimes that's more compelling than reading a book of short stories. And a lot of times, in fact, short story authors get their ideas from reading obituaries or from reading just the newspaper. So I think it's just one of those things, hearing people tell their stories. And actually there's a phrase that I borrow a lot, or I use a lot, which is my mentor, Reynolds, who was an author, North Carolina author. And, he wrote novels, short stories, poems, all sorts of things. Reynolds used to say, we all tell stories all day long, all of our lives. And so when you think about it, stories are just at the heart of everything. Narrative is, we're narrative beings. And that's how we get through the world, is how we kind of function.
Mm, that was so good. Now, when we were chatting about you being on the show, we're talking a little bit about the book that you have coming up, which we'll talk about in a minute. And you know how I approach things. Like, I'm really interested in your, what I call like these unique intersections, right? Because you have a really interesting and compelling one to me, which is the Reiki background, or your background with that. Which first, I just want to like establish that, because I'm not exactly sure how to define that. Like, I know it just from other body work disciplines. But when you told me, it's kind of like you're using your background there as an approach and combining that with your set of skills for interviewing and kind of pulling out these stories from people, I've never heard that before. So that's a lot to unpack, I know. Let's first establish like what the Reiki practice is and what it's not.
Well, before I even do that, I've got to give credit to you, give a nod to you, because when you were coaching me, doing professional coaching about 4 years ago, I think, we were trying to figure out how to give new energy to my work and how to infuse it. And the idea, this intersection, I think we did some Venn diagrams or something, and this intersection was never clear to me, or never jumped out to me. And I think you are the one who said, hey, this Reiki is really interesting, and you love interviewing people. Is there a way to see those complementing each other and working together? And so I took that as a very real nudge and push, and it really helped a lot. So I give thanks and credit to you for that.
So it was my genius.
Well,
That's awesome. And first of all, thank you. I appreciate that. That's cool. But I think that it's a perfect example of storytelling. Is like, I was just kind of mirroring what you were bringing to the table. It's easier, right? When somebody else can be more objective and like see the angles that you might not be able to see. I also didn't realize it was 4 years ago, buddy. Please stop the clock. Okay. I appreciate that very much. I'm still just as interested because, that's not my background at all.
Yeah. Well, so once I took that notion and I started rolling it over, I probably spent about 6 or 7 months making notes and just rolling it over and thinking, okay, how does this really work? Because when I left massage therapy, I was a massage therapist full time before I went to journalism school. And when I stopped being a massage therapist and said, I'm going to journalism school and I want to be a filmmaker and video journalist, a lot of people said, how does that work with massage? And I said, no, they're not, they don't have anything to do with one
It's a
another.
pivot.
Right. It's just a complete shift. They were both interests that I had in my life that I, and I think of massage, and this is not to diminish massage therapists or to reduce the occupation of massage therapy. But massage for me was a very spiritual practice. It was something that I did. It was something it was rote, and I repeated basically the same massage. It was like a meditation. And so it worked on a very different part of my brain than the analytical narrative construction storytelling part of my brain. And so they were just, and I found that I missed and I needed that sort of analytical narrative composition part of my brain to be more active. So once I started focusing more on filmmaking, I realized I could still do massage. I didn't have to charge money for it. And it was relaxing. I mean, every massage I gave, I came out feeling better than when I started. And it's kind of hard to explain. And I didn't feel depleted. I felt energized. I felt, in some way rejuvenated. But I also, I mean, part of that is, the way massage therapists practice, they have to take some measures to protect themselves, so to speak. So, protect your energy, body mechanics. Some people have different things they do that they create like a force field, imaginary force field around themselves so that, they don't take on too much of the recipient's energy, whether it's stress or, whatever it is. But they, so you kind of get energy and relaxation in the process of giving. And the Reiki component was something that I had never anticipated until I started practicing holistic massage. I had always just done, Swedish, fluid, kind of a flow,
Right.
Relaxing. I would just, I want you to feel relaxed, and I'm going to open up every part of your body a little bit, and then you get off the table and you kind of float out of the room. And that's fine. And it just was, I was doing the same thing over and over. With Reiki, it's a bit of a meditation added to that. So and Reiki means universal life force. So you might say, okay, well, that's great. What is universal life force? Isn't that just another word? Isn't that another word for God? And in a lot of ways, I think of it as a religion for myself. So, I mean, I don't want to, call it God per se or call it a religion, but it functions for me in a very spiritual way. And Reiki is generally associated as hands-on healing. So you transmit universal energy, universal life force through your hands, but you don't have to touch someone to do Reiki. In fact, a lot of Reiki practitioners don't touch the physical body. They kind of keep their hands a little bit above the person. And then it's just a meditation. You focus on letting this universal life force find its way into the person where it's needed. And sometimes the person tells you, sometimes some really good Reiki practitioners, and I don't put myself in this category. I'm not a master yet. I might become a Reiki master by the end of the year. I'm a level 2 practitioner, but some people can see auras and can read energy fields just, naturally. It's cultivated for some people. Some people it just happens. And so they can see where the Reiki needs to go, what the energy field in that person, where the insufficiencies are, and they can sort of direct the Reiki into that. I'm not at that level, I'd say yet, because I'd hope to be, but I don't know that I ever will be at that level. But I just trust the universe, the universal life force, to find its way into the person's body. And then I just it's just kind of a feeling. I just kind of focus on that until it feels like it's diminishing. And then I just generally gently remove my hands. And so I don't, it's kind of a mysterious thing. Reiki practitioners are attuned by a Reiki master. And so the attunement happens over a period of time. For some people, there's kind of a revelatory experience. For me, I felt like there was red water cascading down over me at the moment I got the attunement. And then over the next 21 days, I had some profound cleansing that happened, which is, cleansing the chakras over 21 days. And during that period, from that time I felt this sort of red energy or red water washing over me, I thought, this is wild. I don't know what's happening, but this is not anything I expected. It's not something I can control, but I'm going with it. It feels good and right. And so then anyway, if you don't use it, you lose it. So I had to practice it lots and lots and just sort of trust. There's a lot of trust involved in Reiki, trusting that it's working and that, sometimes the person will tell you, and sometimes you just have to know that it's finding its place, and maybe it's not going to be an immediate profound, like, oh my gosh, my shoulder feels better, or oh my gosh, I woke up feeling refreshed the next day. Sometimes the changes and the adjustments are very subtle. So I don't know if that answers all of your questions.
No, it does, and it created new questions, so it's perfect for our conversation. First of all, I got really excited when you were describing all of that, even starting with the body work, like just your kind of normal like Swedish massage and all of that, because it became really clear to me the parallels between massage, Reiki specifically, and storytelling. Like it's connection. When you were talking about the relationship between the person on the table and the therapist, like it's just that exchange. You said the word trust. I heard you didn't say the word, but I was hearing like that connection between the two. I mean, so many parallels to that I'm excited to explore. But first, I just kind of want to put my devil's advocate hat on. For those who might think that, that sounds woo-woo or whatever, can you explain to me what your experience is like when, and you might have already touched on this when you were talking about the Reiki master attuning, I think is the word that you used. That's not them doing the practice on you, is it?
No,
Okay.
It's basically them saying this person is now a conduit, for lack of a better word. This person
understood.
can channel the energy.
So for those listening who haven't experienced this, what was your experience, or what has been your experience as the recipient of the Reiki practice? So having it done to you, what does it feel like? Just so they can understand, like, okay, it's not long Swedish, massage. It's not deep tissue sports massage where they're getting in there. How exactly does it feel for the, I don't know what to call them other than the recipient?
Recipient's
client?
a fine word. Yeah. Client.
Okay.
It feels warm. And sometimes the heat from the hands can be intense. It's generally, that's the main thing you feel, is it feels warm, and you can kind of feel a little bit of an activation, depending on what part of the body the Reiki is being focused on, or maybe it's a general thing. Most of my experience for what it feels like is a subjective, when I'm giving it to someone, what I have observed them feeling. For me, it's always been warm, sort of, maybe a little vibration, but maybe just feeling a lightness, sort of a general relief of concern or worry or pain or whatever. When the times I've done it, when I have had profound reactions or experiences, Reynolds Price, getting back to him again, was paraplegic. And when I came back to Durham in 2002, and then I started learning Reiki in 2004, and I was practicing massage, and I said, Reynolds, I'd like to do massage on you. I think you'd benefit from it, because he had been paraplegic for about 30 years. And he said, okay, that sounds really good. My doctor has mentioned that before. So I went to his house, and I would do about an hour and a half massage, pick him up out of his wheelchair, put him on the table, and then I'd have to roll him over when the time came. But at the end, I would usually do Reiki, because his cancer, which put him in the wheelchair, was focused on his spine. And so I put my hands sometimes under his spinal column, and a lot of his spinal column had been just ripped apart. Basically, there was some places there was no bone protecting the spinal cord, and it was just scar tissue. And so I knew his body well enough to say, okay, I don't even have to ask him where to put my hands. I just knew. And I would put my hands under his spine, and then just hold it there and focus, and, feel the heat building up. And in the first few times I did it, I thought, oh, this is really strong. It's like a magnetism. And I just could just feel like it was like almost a vibration, and I just felt a pull. And so I'm going to leave my hands there until I don't feel that pull as strongly. And sometimes it'd be 20 minutes. And the first couple of times when I finished and I picked him up and put him in the wheelchair, he said, "What did you do to me?" I said, I didn't do anything. I was, that was the universe. That was whatever you want to call it. If you want to call it God force. And he'd say, "If that wasn't you, I would have been really terrified because it was really powerful." And then the second time I got him off the table and put him in the wheelchair, and tears were streaming down his face. And he said, "Buddy, I just felt my legs for the first time in 25 years. And I didn't know what to say. I said, "Well, that's wonderful. I'm excited. Thank you. But that wasn't me." And, that was the universe. And another time he was 250 pounds. And another time I did it, and he told me that he thought his body was levitating. And I said, "You were definitely not levitating. You were on the table squarely." And, so those were some of the most profound effects that I've seen from people receiving the Reiki. And in those instances, I was the conduit. I was there doing it, but I wasn't really doing anything, if that makes any sense.
No, I get what you're saying. Still excited because I see the parallels so much. When did you realize that this had anything to do with your practice of storytelling, of interviewing? When did you realize that there was some overlap there?
Well, honest, to get back to, the conversations with you, I didn't really see the possibility until I started thinking about it, with another person's perspective. And then I started thinking about it, and I'm realizing that when I go into an interview, I have subconsciously developed an approach and a practice of some of the same approach that I use with Reiki, which is minimizing my agenda, minimizing my ego, trying to figure out what the other person was telling me or wanted me to know, and really just trying to adjust to where they were, and not doing Reiki on them in the interview. That's there's a little bit of an ethical issue of I'm going to do the silent energy thing. That's kind of shady, I think. But it was more of an approach to allowing them to be their more authentic, and this might sound cheesy or cliche, but more divine self. So they can open up and feel comfortable that I'm not this person who's trying to take something from them, but I'm trying to allow them to access their more authentic, they're more fully who they are, if that is probably a more appropriate phrase. And a lot of times in an end of an interview, I can't count the number of times people have said, "Wow, that was wonderful. I feel so much better now than I did before the interview. That's weird." Or, "I heard myself say things that I didn't expect myself to say." Or, "Oh, thank you." Thanking me for you doing this interview, which is helping me do my work. That almost doesn't compute. So I just really had to do a reflection through this new lens of seeing these things paired together. And once I started to, it's kind of like, you probably know the phrase or the feeling of when you let your eyes go out of focus, you can sort of see shapes and things a little bit more clearly. And sort of in a metaphysical, broader way, when we're telling stories, sometimes if you don't focus on all the details, you can see the story more clearly. And so that's kind of what, it's sometimes a really challenging skill to practice or to learn, but that's something that I think of with regard to seeing this combination, this pairing, is that, when I don't think about the mechanics of doing the interview, I realize that I'm using this kind of philosophy of Reiki in my practice of approaching an interview or a story.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense to me. So that makes perfect sense as a strategy. And with Reiki, when you're working with someone, maybe you don't have any particular goal. Maybe it really is leaning into, what they are seeking in that moment. With an interview or video journalism, storytelling, oftentimes you have a story you're trying to craft, perhaps, certain things that you need to get to build the story. Maybe not for every single one, but usually you would have some motive or objective as well. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
At least like in this conversation, right? Like I don't have it scripted what I'm going to ask you, but there are certain topics that I want to make sure that we cover, right? So at least to that degree. So the question directly is, how do you walk the line between being, kind of completely hands off and just following their energy, their lead, which allows them to be their divine self? I think that is, makes perfect sense. How do you juggle that or walk the line between that and then making sure that you get the content that you need to build the story?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's, so when I go into interviews, probably in a similar approach to you, I don't have questions scripted out. Almost never have questions scripted out. And I say almost never because sometimes the client might require, you need to ask this or you need to do this. And so I'll adjust for whatever the specific encounter is. But most of the time I have notes, and I refer to those notes like, I need to hear them say applied science, or I need to hear them say, that's how we reached the conclusions that we reached, or whatever. And so I sort of think of it as curiosity. I sort of bend my curiosity toward those items in my notes. And I do that. I always try to ask, probably you do really similar, and I can already tell that you are, but open-ended questions, not, what happened then, or what was that thing,
Totally.
but how did you feel? How did you come to this? What did this, how does this make sense in your life? How does this, something that will allow them to give their own explanation. And then that can be tricky because sometimes people, as you know, can be long-winded. And so, what you're sort of listening for, but you want them to give it in the most authentic, natural way. So then if they go on for, many minutes, like as I probably am, you might say, okay, Will, could you tell me that again in like 2 or 3 sentences? Great. And so they've already said the thing that in their natural way. And so they've already rehearsed it. And so then I can say, yes, Rain, I make a few notes on a piece of paper, and then I will refer to those notes and I'll ask questions that allow them to reflect on those items in a natural, organic way so that it is authentic, but maybe still getting the points that I need to get.
That was perfect answer of how to address that. I appreciate that. Who do you think could benefit from, or who could use this approach that you've found?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I've written this book that I call INNERviewing, INNER viewing, and as opposed to interviewing. So really focusing on, looking within oneself or looking within the other person, and heart forward storytelling, and sort of a holistic approach to communication. And so interviewing, heart forward storytelling is not simply something that can be applied to journalists or filmmakers or radio interviewers or anybody, maybe there's somebody who's doing market research. They do interviewing all the time. Those are obvious applications, but anyone who is doing conversational, let's say interrogation for lack of a better word, but conducting conversations as part of their work. So attorneys, doctors, insurance adjusters. I mean, these are people who rely on talking to people all day long as a part of their work. And they probably accept in the case of probably doctors or psychotherapists, they're not really ever coached on the art of how to talk to people. And so, most of us in some way or another, if we have a human centric, you know, I don't know, occupation, I guess is the simplest word. I was going to say avocation, but occupation, then we rely on conversation in some way to shape our work. And so I think anybody who's doing conversations, trying to rely on conversations to make things happen can use this.
And is it safe to say that any of those people can learn this that don't have your, your experience, your background?
Yes. And so the book I've written breaks things down, and I have a series of, I think it's 15 or 16 exercises, and the exercises are intended not to be, some of them can be quick. You can probably do them in about 20 minutes or 15 minutes, but some of them require, lots of thought and rehearsal. But it's something that needs to be practiced. It's not something you're going to read the book and then be like, okay, I've got it. I'm going off and I'm doing this heart-forward storytelling. And I mean, in some cases that may happen because maybe they're already practicing a variation of this and they can say, oh, I'm just going to tweak it and add these components, or remember to minimize my ego, remember to minimize my agenda, remember to have more empathy and compassion in the way I talk to people. But for a lot of people, it takes practice, and with practice, anybody can do it. But sometimes that just takes a little bit of time.
I think this would be so helpful for folks, because even though we're talking about interviewing, you've already said this as well. Like, it's really just conversation, it's communication at the end of the day. And this also might be kind of cliche to say, or like, I just feel like we're, as a culture, kind of moving away from that, or we run the risk of running away from like being able to deeply connect with people through communication. But this, when I hear you describing that, like who could use this, why it would be helpful, I think so many people could benefit from understanding how to interview people, because if you frame it from what I just said, like it's just conversation, communication, well, it happens when you're looking, you're trying to get a job, right? You interview, you talk to somebody from both sides, right? The interviewee and the interviewer. Anytime you're having to collaborate with another human.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. As I sometimes say, and you certainly know as well, narrative and storytelling is not a straight line almost ever. It's almost, and working with people similarly is not a straight line. And so we have to adjust, and you have to practice. And especially as men, we are not well practiced at listening. And this is something that our culture has started to wake up to, but we really need to practice listening. If everybody practiced listening more and talking less in their conversations with people who really matter, the world would be dramatically different. And one of the things that I say in the book is, I try to practice the 80-20 rule. Let the other person do 80% of the talking. Mm-hmm. And in that 20% that you talk, make sure it's not just fluff. I mean, you can talk about yourself or how something resonates with you, or why that seems interesting. And then what is interesting as well is a whole different conversation, right? But why is this resonating? What is this, what's appealing about this? And if you reflect to the other person that you're listening and you hear them, then the conversation changes quickly. And that's one way that they can start to feel more comfortable, and they can feel more, more authentic. They can open up and start to access, more of those thoughts and emotions and things that that are more authentic, they didn't really expect to be accessing.
Even though I was just asking about and talking about how so many different people could benefit from this, is there a specific type of storytelling or interviewing that you were trying to like direct with this book and this approach?
Well, the one thing that has always been a passion of mine, and probably similarly for you, I think this is one way we connect is accessing the stories of our relatives or our elders. Um, and so I have recorded interviews with just about, I think there's one aunt left, but all of my aunts and uncles, my parents, I made an interview with my grandmother before I really realized what I was doing. When how in 2003 or four, I had access to a good video camera and I just started asking her questions at a Thanksgiving table. And, I'm really grateful I did that. But it was, if I had thought of put intention behind that, now I've been, my parents on their 50th wedding anniversary, I interviewed them and did a little video about, how they met and how they stayed together for 50 years. What was it like for my mother and my aunts and uncles growing up in South Carolina, traveling around as part of, their preacher's kids. And so how my parents met, what my father, how his reflections on being in Vietnam and how that ties into his nearly a lifetime of running, all those things are really important stories. And so I've used this approach in collecting those stories. And I would like to teach people how to do that more effectively, more authentically, with relatives before they say, "Oh, I wish I had done that. I wish I had gotten dad to tell those stories about, living on the beach in, Tahiti," or whatever the story is. That we all have stories in our families that are important that we wish we could save forever. And I think that's probably the thing that I'm most passionate about applying this this construct, this paradigm to.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you kind of alluded to, that I'm fully aligned with that. And a lot of the listeners know about the startup that I was a co-founder at, Capture Fully, which then evolved into Heartfelt. And it's funny because whenever I started talking about this, Will, like people, people like us sounds so terrible, but other filmmakers, other storytellers and journalists, like so many people had done that with their own families, like. And I say people like us because people who are already thinking about the power of capturing stories, right? So it's not new to them. They are storytellers. And so it makes sense that like this guy I know from LinkedIn is like, yeah, I wrote a book about my dad's life. I mean, I saw that a lot. But I didn't see a lot of people who, normal people, no, I'm just kidding. But, people who have different jobs that aren't constantly thinking about the power of stories and narrative. I didn't see that as much. And so you had to kind of like, explain to them like why. So why is this important? Like I'm there, I get it, but for someone listening who might be reluctant or they haven't even thought about it, like why is capturing these stories of our elders, of our families, of different generations, why is that so important to us?
Well, I mean, at a foundational level, it's who we are. It defines, I mean, our family, if we forget our family history, it starts to erode our sense of who we are. And my mother, when I was in high school and my brother and I would leave the house on a Friday night or something to go out with friends, every single time my mother would stop us before we went out the house and say, "Remember who you are." And that's kind of, it's kind of a wonderful burden, right? But for a lot of people, if you said, "Remember who you are," and they stop and think, okay, what does that mean? Who am I? And why, what does remembering who I am have to do with going out on a Friday night? But it influences and it affects and it informs everything we do and how we interact with other people, how we treat other people, how we respond to events in the world around us. I think it's really just comes down to that, is our family history is who we are. And if we don't capture the family history, I mean, the simplest way to do it, right, is to take your iPhone and sit down with your mother, father, aunt, or uncle, or maybe the elderly neighbor next door, and just have a conversation, but have the conversation in a way, using this sort of paradigm, this sort of, the structure of the approach, and so that they feel comfortable, they feel warm and heard and empowered. And then let them tell their story the way they want to tell it, not to feel judged, not to feel, prodded, not to feel like you're taking something from them, but you're letting them make their mark. And I mean, I think a lot of the time, and you probably do too, about like, what is my legacy? How is the world going to remember me when I'm gone? Will the world remember me when I'm gone? And if so, will it be good, bad, or will it be some flimsy thing like, oh yeah, he worked for an insurance company for 35 years and that was it. Not to say that's bad, but like, is that going to be a lasting legacy? Or he worked for an insurance company and he cared about the people that he worked for, and he listened to those people, and every single client, customer knew him and it mattered, and his impact was way beyond some sort of superficial job title, right? And I think sometimes thinking about our own legacy can cause us to value the legacy of our elders more. I think all these things tie together. Hopefully that makes sense and doesn't sound.
Yeah, I totally agree. So that makes sense on what we have to gain from doing this. Let's flip the script on that. What's at risk if we don't, or we wait too late for the inevitable, outcome?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I guess, regret, right? And regret hopefully is, not just a motivating force. It's a negative. It can be a negative force, but, I mean, I think that one of the most wonderful things I've heard was somebody on their deathbed saying, I only regret my economies. I only regret the things I didn't do.
Yeah.
And so that's the way I want to try to live my life, and not to have regret, to embrace everything, and to know that, if, let's say, using the elderly neighbor, reference, if you have an elderly neighbor and they pass away, and then you know that you got that really powerful interview about what it was like growing up in Durham in the 1930s, that is powerful, amazing, resonant. You can be really happy about that. If you didn't do that, you kind of will never know what that feeling, what satisfaction and reward you might have gotten from doing it. So it's a little bit of the unknown. We don't know what we're going to miss unless we, if we don't have it. Right. And so I guess it's a little bit of a question. I mean, it's an open-ended question I don't really entirely have an answer for, except there are people who have died and I'm like, oh, I really wish I had done that. And there's a sense of longing, a sense of desire and incompleteness that you have if you don't do that.
Well, I think you said it really well earlier. It's directly tied to who we are. And so there's a chunk of yourself, and not just we individually, like my great aunt and me, but also culturally, like we as people. I always go back to, like, there's a reason why, if you look through history, all different cultures had some tribal storyteller that was to pass down the histories, the stories, and the lessons learned to the next generation. So it's not just like my bloodline. So of course that has a direct relation to who I am if I learn about my great grandfather. But also we as people, like you said, you're from Durham. Hearing what it was like 100 years ago is relevant. It is relevant to what's happening today. And I'm like you. I tried to do this with my great uncle who lived to 103, but he grew up on the Outer Banks in Buxton, and used to talk about playing baseball on the other side of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse before they moved in 99. So that's now all ocean, right? And so lived through the Great Depression, lived through, fought in World War II, like all these great things. So, and he stayed sharp as a tack till he was late 90s. And it was just a little bit too late when I interviewed him. I was just starting my little baby documentary filmmaker career. And so I had a camera, but he was still cognizant and coherent, but it wasn't as sharp as it would have been had I done it sooner. So I'm really glad you mentioned that part about like, just grab your iPhone, because I think the barrier blocks a lot of people. Like, well, I don't know how to do it. And, and I don't know where to start. And it's like, yeah, listen to what you're saying about how to communicate and interview somebody, which is the 80-20 rule is like perfect for that. And just grab your iPhone. You're going to be so glad you have that than having to go hire someone like me or you to bring a whole like production crew. It's not necessary. It's the story that's powerful. Anyways, I know I'm going off on a tangent, but I lived this personally well before, I started looking at it professionally, where my uncle couldn't quite answer the questions. And he was such a character. And I'm like, 5 years sooner, and it would have been great. Now, I know many people who wait beyond that point and they don't get anything. And it's tragic. It honestly is.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you were talking, and as I, reflecting on some of the things that I've said, also, I just realized how many times in this conversation we are making references to things we have learned from other people, and how that has enriched our lives. Right. I mean, I have mentioned so many things from Reynolds, and I made a documentary on Reynolds Price's teaching. Actually 2 documentaries. The first one was technically really weak. So I redid it 15 years later. But what are the things that we carry with us, that in our brains, the things that we have retained just by virtue of listening to stories? And, maybe there was a lesson from somebody. I mean, this is a simple thing, but like, I had an English professor who used to say, don't ever tell somebody happy belated birthday, because there's no such thing as a belated birthday. You can say belatedly happy birthday. And it's a really small thing, but I remember that him looking at me and kind of shaking his finger, and it's it's just part of this person's personality, that stays with me. And so there's these little things that impact our lives everywhere. And if we didn't have those things recorded in our memory, we wouldn't be able to reference them. So that just emphasizes a lot of value. We have this technology at our fingertips. So if we use the technology for ways to enhance our memories, or imprint the memories so that we can go back and reference them later, then it's even more powerful, right? We can think about all the lessons that we can learn just by recording simple conversations.
So good, my friend. That's a perfect place to end the conversation for today. But before we go, tell me about the book. Like, when is it coming out? Where can people find it?
Yeah, well, currently I have it available only for coaching clients. And I'm still and there's a twofold purpose in that. Part of that is to give value to the early coaching clients. And also I'm sort of proofreading it slowly and taking input, figuring out things that might need to be in it more. I'm planning to release it on Amazon before the end of the year. So probably December. Nice. I'll have it available on Amazon. So INNERviewing, Heart Forward Storytelling and Holistic Communication. It's not a huge book. If you were to read it straight through, you could probably read it in maybe a day. It's about 115 pages, lots of exercises. About a third of the book is outlining my approach, most of which I've sort of mentioned here, the approach of Reiki with storytelling. And then about 2/3 of the book is anecdotes and lessons that I have learned. Some of the lessons have informed heart forward storytelling, and some of the anecdotes are ways that I've applied it. So I've interviewed, I don't know, probably over 1,000 people in the last 18 years as an independent video journalist and filmmaker. And, those range from Jane Goodall to Al Franken to, various authors. And so it's, there are a lot of interesting ways that this can be applied in different scenarios. And I think that's part of the value of the book is figuring out, okay, I do conversations in my work. How do I apply this philosophy in my own work?
Absolutely. honestly, then not jumping the gun, but then there might be chances for like not sequels. What do you call them in a book? Like, interviewing for, for recruiters. I'm just kidding, but
No,
I there's a lot of options there with it. I'm excited, man. I want to get the chance to read it whenever you're ready, but I think this is super cool. I think it's way cool that I had, our work together had any role in all of this, but I think the approach is awesome. I'm always excited about, those unique intersections and how people carve out their unique perspectives on the world, right? And the work that they do in it. So, yeah, man, excited for you. Proud of you, man. This is awesome.
well, thank you. Thanks for your nudge in this direction. 4 short years ago, and I appreciate that. I appreciate your opportunity to have me on your show and to talk about this stuff. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely, brother. I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to seeing you in real life very soon here in our beautiful town of Durham.
Likewise. Take care, Rain. I hope things go well.
Thanks, buddy. My name is Rain Bennett. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed that episode, do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. If you're already a subscriber and you're enjoying the show, give us a review and let us know the value that you've gotten from it. We love to hear from our listeners and learn about the benefits that they're getting from the show. That's what fuels us, and that's what fuels the show. And if you've already subscribed and you've already reviewed it and you think there's someone else that would benefit from listening to this show, please share it with them. The more we grow, the more we can help you grow, and that's what we're here to do. Join us next time on the Storytelling Lab.